So Albertaceratops recently got a TLC, and it's really fun. I think the block playstyle is really rewarding, and actually, fun enough, rewards people for paying attention to their opponent's moves and what they're going to be using when fighting. I think the vocal animations are really cool. I'm a big fan of that. I think the kit overall is pretty well balanced. I think block needs to be increased from 10% damage reduction to something else. But while I was checking it out with my buddy, I couldn't help but feel bitter towards it. And I know that's a weird thing to say, because when it comes to new releases, most people are either excited or disappointed or enraged, but the whole time I was looking at it, I was just looking and thinking, man, this is really cool, but it's just leaving my boy Iguanodon in the dust. And that made me really salty, suffice to say. Now you may be thinking, Ray, why are you feeling bitter about Iguanodon? You've done a ton of videos on it, and you pretty much only sing its praise. And to that, I'd have to say, you probably don't show up to many of my streams, because I complain about Iguanodon non-stop. And it is all out of love, I assure you, because if it wasn't obvious by my channel logo or how many videos I've done on it, Iguanodon is by far my favourite dinosaur, with the only other dinosaur coming close to it being Pachyrhinosaurus, but, Iguanodon's an official, so, more clicks. But also, it's just, it's been my favourite dinosaur for, decades now. And playing it for so long has revealed to me a lot of the issues it has. And that being that it's very much been left behind in the gutter after all of the other TLC dinos. So, what issues do I have with Iguanodon? Well, it's mainly to do with its kit and lack thereof. Its kit isn't awful, per se. You can still have great success with it, and I think a good Iguanodon is still something that's going to be feared by a lot of players. But the amount of hoops that you have to jump through to make Iguanodon function as a playable and actually keep up with the other dinosaurs in the roster is nothing short of frustrating to me. And I think that's the biggest issue I have with it. It isn't that it's bad, because it's not. It's that it's frustrating. And I would rather play a dinosaur that is fun and bad than a dinosaur that is good but frustrating. So what are these abilities that apparently give me so much strife? Well, to start off simple, we'll have a look at the front limb slot, of which it has two, which is pretty nice. There's a lot of dinos such as Suchomimus that would very much greatly appreciate having two front limb slots. But just looking into it, you kind of start to see that Iggy is not like most other dinosaurs. That being, out of these 5 abilities, only 2 of them can actually deal any sort of damage. That being Thumb Barrage and Arm Slam. Now, both of these abilities are already flawed to me. First of all, at the time of recording this, Arm Slam is currently bugged and doesn't actually do any AoE, making it incredibly difficult to land in general. You know what would have been a good update to fix this? The AoE update. And then you have Thumb Barrage, which is actually a pretty good ability, I will give you that, but is very frustrating to use because you can only use it while in your crouch or while in your bipedal stance, which slows you down tremendously, and you can only hit 3 times. Now, when this ability first came out, you were able to hit all 3 barrages while coming out of a sprint. However, they then changed this so where you could no longer do that, but then later added it back. And now what you have is again another bugged ability where you only swing twice. And you can actually see in the replay here that it tries to do the third animation, but then gets stuck, meaning that you can't actually do any significant damage when coming out of a sprint. On top of that, said damage is also bugged, as Thumb Barrage works the same way as Claw Barrage works on Sucho, where the first hit you deals less damage than the ones after. However, when coming out of Sprint, you don't actually scale, and do even less damage. And here's a video of us trying. As you can see, the damage that we did to said Aloe is actually far less than just hitting it normally with 2 Thumb Barrages. Now, these issues can definitely be chalked up to just being annoying bugs, but what can't be chalked up to be an annoying bug are its other 2 abilities in its front limb slot, that being Running Start and Quadrupedal. Why are these abilities in the front limb slot? That's like having the crouch sense in the same slot as T-Rex's bite. Like, it just completely invalidates these abilities. And even then, neither of them are that good. Like, acceleration? Iggy's acceleration, sure, it's a bit on the slow side, but any sort of knockback dealt to Iggy while running completely shuts it down. And the other ability, quadrupedal, buffing your damage while on 4 legs, is completely useless as well. Because the only abilities that this actually buffs is back kick, charge, and tail attack. Which might seem like a pretty good collection, but when you look at it, tail attack does 5 damage, so you're really not increasing it by much, and Iguanodon's charge is by far the worst charge in the game, doing a maximum of 60 damage. Now, I wouldn't have that big of a problem with these abilities. Granted, they definitely need some sort of update or change or fix or whatever just to make them even slightly more viable. But again, having them in the front slot? That's like not having a tail attack in a tail slot, instead having it in a back limb slot. Oh wait, that's exactly what Iguanodon has, unlike every other dinosaur in the game, including the ones that don't have a tail attack. Right. Let's move on and look at something else. Let's look at... the hides, of which, surprise surprise, I still have issues with. So let's take a look at them. Of the 3 hides, we have Resilient Hide, Second Wind, and Thick Scutes. Now, a lot like the actual attacking abilities, these aren't that bad on paper. However, when you compare these to literally every other dinosaur in the game, it starts to lag. Now, for these comparisons, I'm going to leave out Second Wind. I think Second Wind is an okay ability, but it's not different for exclusively Iguanodon. But what is different is the Resilient Hide and Thick Scutes. To start off with, Resilient Hide is quite literally the worst resilient in the entire game, being beaten out by, and let's see here... Amarga having 30, Stego having 30, Anno having 30, Sty having 30, Pycno having 30, Kai and Urino having 30, Titan having 40, Kentro having 40, Cerato having 40, Bars having 100, and Io having 100, whereas Iguanodon has 20. But it doesn't stop there, because even Thick Scutes is on the lower end of the healing hides, with many dinos, such as Titan or Suko, having a 40% health regen hide, whereas old Iguanodon is back with 20. Now, you could make the argument that, oh, the dinosaurs that you've compared Iguanodon to, some of them have had their TLCs and some of them haven't, so many of these are subject to change. But to that I say hooey, because Iguanodon has had its TLC, and if you want to make the argument that, oh, you gotta wait for other dinos like Stein or whatever to get their TLC, because, you know, maybe they'll have the 20% hide, you can't tell how long that will be, because we've been waiting 4 bloomin' years for Alioramus to have its TLC. Which again makes it frustrating because as of right now, Iguanodon is uniquely bad. Or do I need to wait another 4 years in order to complain after everything else has had its TLC? Because at that point, I might as well not make any argument because hey, all of this will be fixed in the future, so why bring any attention to it? Now, I could go on and complain even more about how abilities like Hero Stand are also bugged, in how, despite saying any attack will add to the stack, doesn't actually take into consideration back kick and charge. But I don't want to be entirely negative, despite this being a rant video. So, how would I fix this? Well, for a start, I would move tail attack to an actual tail slot and move planted feet to a passive. Now, some of you may be going, whoa, hold on there, bub. Not once have you mentioned planted feet or pivot, and now all of a sudden you're bringing them up, and to that I would have to say yes, I haven't really talked about them because they're both very good abilities, but much like quadrupedal and running start, it's in the wrong place. But if you were to move planted feet to a passive slot, not only would this make Iguanodon far less frustrating to play, remember half of Iguanodon's attacks can only be used when bipedal, but would also be buffing its block. Now, block I haven't really talked much about, and that's because block is, once again, a very good ability, and honestly one of my favourite abilities to use in the game in general. But with the inclusion of the Albertaceratops TLC as well as the Eotrike TLC, Iguanodon's block feels very last minute. However, if Planted Feet were to become a passive, block would be far better to use in Iguanodon, all without having to give it any new abilities, any changes, or anything in general. And as for Pivot, why not move this to the Scent slot? There's only 3 options in there to begin with, so adding Pivot would make for another great solo ability, much like Retaliate. which would conveniently free up 2 extra spaces in the back limb slot, perfect for moving running start and quadrupedal to, which I think is a lot more fitting considering both abilities literally center around Iguanodon's back limbs. And last but not least, buff resilient scales and thick scutes to 30% at least. And so, with all these changes and all these bug fixes, this is what I think would not only make Iguanodon far more fun to play, but also allow Iguanodon to keep up with Path of Titan's ever-expanding roster. I really, really love Iguanodon, and this video is made purely out of love. I'm not making this to call out the developers for being lazy or whatever, or not making it to cover my ass for when I end up losing battles because Iguanodon is a bad dinosaur. I'm purely making this video because Iguanodon is my favourite dinosaur of all time, and I desperately want to play it in Path of Titans, one of my favourite games of all time, without pulling any of my hair out. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like. Tell me what you think in the comments about Iguanodon. Do you like my ideas? Are there any abilities that you would add to it? Or am I completely incorrect and Iguanodon is actually the perfect dinosaur in the game with no flaws? Let me know. But until then, I will see you in the next one. Bye!